If you're deeply religious, then this video might be quite controversial as it questions some religious creation beliefs in an attempt to offer more logical explanations that make more sense grounded in reality. Although I'm not religious, I still think religion serves a large purpose in much of society currently, and it does have many positive effects. Cultural life lessons and morals, positive practices, festive holidays, and can be great for communities as a way of bringing people together and support each other. But ultimately, the core of belief in most organisational religions starts with the belief in a god or gods who created this world. So in this video, I'll be explaining some of the reasons why religion has been dying increasingly faster over the last century in particular, and also to give a more logical, real-world explanation for how the development of a belief in gods and higher powers could have originally started. And inventing the concept of gods may also have ironically been some of the first times humans attempted to scientifically conceptualize sequences of events occurring in nature to offer an explanation for the unknown. Now, I'd like to start by explaining my personal history with religion, including my current beliefs and views on organisational religion in general, so you understand where I'm coming from. But if you would just like to hear my hypothesis and estimated timeline of how we invented and developed the idea of gods, you can jump to the timestamp below. So I'm religiously unaffiliated and have been most of my life. I'm from the UK and grew up around mainly Christianity. My family took me to church and I was a member of the Cubs and Scouts at my local church through to my early teenage years. In school we prayed and sung hymns during assemblies, so I was quite involved in religion during my childhood. But being an inquisitive and logical individual, I always wanted to understand how things worked and never just accepted what other people say if it doesn't seem to agree with reality. So blindly believing something without understanding or proof has never sat right with me, even since a young age. I would ask questions about God and religious stories, but every answer I was ever given made no logical sense to me, even when I was 10 years old. I felt like I had to suspend my disbelief to even entertain the ideas, and had the same feeling that fantasy stories give me. It just didn't match reality and always sounded like something told out of repetition, not an actual understanding. Even now, at over 40 years of age, I don't believe in an intelligent creator. However, I still don't completely rule out the idea, and only because we still don't exactly know how the universe began, so I can't rule out the idea of a creator 100% yet. Currently, we still have no proof of any type of god or creator. Even with all the scientific advancements, technology and capabilities we've developed the last few centuries, we've learned how to measure the speed of light, the size of our observable universe, and mapped millions of galaxies outside of our own. We're able to predict planetary orbits years into the future with increasingly better accuracy. We know what lightning is, how earthquakes happen, how charged particles from the sun interact with Earth's magnetosphere creating the aurora borealis, DNA sequencing, microchips, rovers on Mars, yet the best evidence for an apparent intelligent creator is still just man-made stories in man-made languages in man-made books written by man-made ink thousands of years before we had scientific tools and methods to accurately measure aspects of reality. It would be a different matter if some stories explained some phenomena or provided something that would be impossible to know until we developed technology and science, but in fact it's been the opposite. And so many stories and timelines that are described in different religious texts are either being proven to be completely wrong, like the Bible estimating the age of the Earth to be somewhere between 6,000 and 8,000 years old, when we know that the Earth is around 4.5 billion years old, and there's the biblical account of Genesis with the 7 days of creation, which is so provably wrong and contradicting with reality that it just seems straight out of a child's imagination. And some events are gaining more logical explanations that appeared to be supernatural events hundreds or thousands of years ago, like plagues, insect migrations, and natural disasters like tsunamis and earthquakes, for example. So things that used to be thought as the wrath of God no longer need God as an explanation, as we now understand how things work in reality. I like to think of it just like the way magic works, as when you witness a magician perform magic tricks that appear to defy physics and reality, it feels like magic at first as you can't explain it, but you witness it with your own eyes, reinforcing your belief of a supernatural ability. But then as soon as the method of a trick is revealed, the illusion is broken. It no longer feels like magic, and then you understand how the illusion works. This is why magicians work so hard to keep the methods of their tricks a secret for as long as they possibly can. Science is the tool that's gradually pulling back the curtain and revealing how reality works, and the leaders of organised religions are the magicians trying to convince people that the illusion is real still. Whether those individual leaders genuinely believe in their religious teachings or not is a different matter, but they're all regurgitating and teaching ancient mythological stories.
Well,
one thing that's never made sense to me is if some almighty God created us human beings and wanted us to acknowledge or worship them, then I would like to think that their existence would be pretty obvious to every individual on Earth, without needing to rely on pure faith from listening to wealthy robed people in fancy buildings repeating ancient books from inaccurately informed people trying to convince you of how reality works. Everyone knows that many people are manipulative and clever, and have probably always been, especially when it's from a charismatic person with a desire for control and power, which you practically need to have to attract and grow followers. And with that in mind, think about many of today's leaders, presidents, CEOs, influencers. Some percentage of each of their followers will blindly believe everything that person or organisation says. And that's happening in today's modern society, where we have an abundance of education and information from all over the world at our fingertips to help inform ourselves. So if people are still being manipulated and divided that effectively with all the modern tools we have today, think about how much easier it would be to convince people of something many centuries before we could actually explain how previously unexplainable things happen with our modern tools and knowledge. Also, look at how many thousands of religions there are today that have different beliefs and practices around the world. Now, if there was a creator of this world and religious leaders claim that they can talk to these gods, then why can't they agree with each other? We're all the same species after all. I find this one of the most compelling reasons pointing to religion being a purely human-made cultural construct. And that's why I think the most genuine religions mainly focus on its practices being a tool and a guide to improve your life and relationships, like Buddhism for example, which aren't full of wealthy organisations trying to convince and manipulate you to think in a certain way or believe something that can't be proven or disproven through current means. Many religions also conflict with each other and attack one another if someone doesn't hold the same non-provable belief as another person. There's even conflicts between religions that do believe in the same God. If any creation beliefs or supernatural beliefs were provable, then religious people would easily be able to convince non-believers and people of other religions, the same way as you can with any provable fact when you actually have sound evidence and reasoning that makes sense in reality without requiring blind faith. The concept of praying and speaking to God I also think is quite strange, as we all have a built-in biological mechanism in our minds that allow us to simulate what someone might think of as praying or listening to God or hearing voices, called imagination. Everyone has it, but obviously people have varying levels of imagination and inner dialogue control. So people with greater control can imagine voices and images easier than people with lower control, and that is how I think people claim God speak to them, or is responding to prayers. The ability of the human mind can account for all of that on its own through imagination and inner dialogue. We are currently in the middle of the greatest religious shift in recorded history, as it's thought that over 99% of the world's population had a religious belief for the last 2,000 or 3,000 years, all the way up until the early 1900s, coincidentally when scientific discoveries and technology was really starting to accelerate in development. Then by 1970, around 20% of the world identified as non-religious, and today, 50 years later, around 1/3 of the entire world has become non-religious. There's many reasons, including the ones I've outlined, why well over 2 billion people and growing identify as non-religious. Plus the amount of non-religious people is growing faster than the growth of religious groups. And if that number keeps accelerating, then the world might flip to being over 90% non-religious in the next century or two, as we continue to develop more technology and methods to understand what was previously unknowable. There is also still a possibility that something may get discovered which proves the universe was created by some sort of intelligence, as for example, with how technology has advanced over this last century alone, if we don't wipe ourselves out, then perhaps thousands of years in the future we may even develop a way to create a universe that we control ourselves. And in that case we would technically be the equivalent gods of that universe, but that's the only real logical way that I can think of that some sort of gods could exist. Either that or aliens, but aliens travelling through the universe would be way more advanced than we are currently, so there's no way that the word of God was from aliens. They wouldn't be so wrong unless they were purposefully trolling, which is a very funny thought. aliens gaslighting humanity. And in a way, isn't that sort of what we do to our kids when we teach them about Santa and the Easter Bunny and the tooth fairy? From what we've discovered through science, the evidence strongly indicates that the universe did have a beginning. Obviously, nobody actually knows yet how it started, but unless any real compelling evidence appears of an intelligent creator, then I consider the absence of evidence to be in itself evidence of absence, and I currently lean towards the notion that the universe is a natural occurrence and possibly the start of material existence itself. Or the universe could be a part of a recurring process or a multiverse type of construct. We are yet to truly peek behind the curtain, and probably won't develop a way to for a very long time, if it's even possible. Now let's get into how I think people originally invented the concept of God. First, we need to look at ourselves as the animal species we are without our modern lens, as it's easy to detach yourself from the animal kingdom as a modern human. So let's briefly go back in time. Now, as you probably know, we are a mammal in the order of primates, and primates have been evolving for over 50 million years. Hominids popped up in the primate line over 6 million years ago, then the genus Homo, which is the evolutionary branch that we are part of and think of as more human-like species, started popping up over 2 million years ago. So far, we've discovered about 15 different species similar to us in the genus Homo from the last 2 million years plus. Modern humans, or Homo sapiens, are just the most recent species in the genus Homo, and we are the only Homo species left on Earth now, with the last species to go extinct before us being either the Denisovans or Neanderthals between 30 and 40,000 years ago. The oldest Homo sapien fossil currently dates back to around 300,000 years ago, but Homo erectus had an extremely impressive span, as they were one of the early Homo species from around 2 million years ago, and they only went extinct around 100,000 years ago. Also, Homo erectus are considered the first species to control and use fire around 1 million years ago from natural fires, but Neanderthals are considered to be the first species to actually create fire at least 400,000 years ago from our current finds, and that's 100,000 years before our species Homo sapiens even arrived on the scene. But obviously techniques slowly developed over time amongst the Homo species, allowing fire making to become a pretty common practice universally by around 125,000 years ago. Now I'll be getting into the meat of the explanation, but I started here with our evolution and relationship to other species to help paint a picture showing that we are clearly not a special or divine species that was intelligently designed. We slowly over time evolved as a variation of an animal, just like every creature that has ever existed. We Homo sapiens weren't even the species who first invented fire making, which was probably the greatest initial achievement, as that single invention gave controlled light, warmth, protection, and a way to cook food on demand. As well as trying to survive for hundreds of thousands of years, our species would experience so many unexplainable events, and would notice repeating patterns in nature: the sun rising and falling, seasons changing, earthquakes, lightning storms, tsunamis, meteors and meteor showers, moon phases. We would have watched these things happen for many thousands of years before we would develop the capability to actually figure out what these events are and how they happen. Well, even tens of thousands of years ago, our evolved cognitive abilities would spark curiosity when we experience something we don't understand, especially if we need to figure out if something is a threat or potentially useful to us. Larger communities and necessary things like agriculture to start supporting those larger communities only began popping up around 11 to 12,000 years ago, when the climate started warming after the last glacial period, more commonly known as the last ice age. And although Sumerian is the oldest written language we've discovered dating over 5,000 years ago, it's likely there was relatively complex language leading up to that time as well, due to the growth of communities and invention of agriculture. For many thousands of years, humans were living off instinct, trying to survive in relatively small groups amongst all the other wild animals. But with larger groups of people eventually starting to settle down, it brought more safety and free time, not having to be on the move all year round. And that gave people the mental space to start thinking and pondering more. So with more time to ponder, more people interacting, and no knowledge of why weather and other natural events actually occur, you start trying to problem solve and come up with possible reasons. Everything you experience in nature has a cause and effect. So maybe you start thinking that there's some unseen entities causing these things to happen, assigning names to these imagined entities, the kind of idea that thousands of years later develops into the famously known mythology of Greek gods, for example, like Zeus being the god of the sky, creating thunder and throwing lightning bolts when he was angry, and Poseidon being the god of the sea, manipulating the weather, water and ocean activity. As the seed of those ideas was likely thousands of years before, when humans were trying to reason with why nature acted in certain ways, it feels like a primitive scientific line of thinking by trying to figure out what was causing things well out of your control to happen. Each named entity representing a phenomenon was like a theory, so ironically religion may have started as primitive humans trying to figure out events in nature and assigning names to an imagined entity causing those events to happen. It was ultimately the seeds of those original ideas is what I think was the original invention of a belief in gods. The Egyptians, Greeks and Romans were thousands of years later, and they had many gods, with each god representing something that we didn't have a real explanation for. So the labelling of an unexplainable event with a named entity or being went on for thousands of years. Then monotheism, the belief in just one god who created everything, first started appearing around the 6th century BC with Zoroastrianism in Iran. In fact, there were a few monotheist religions that started throughout the 6th century BCE, which I think is interesting timing, as over the next couple of centuries, Greek philosophers conducted numerous experiments figuring out the shape and the size of the Earth pretty accurately, even by today's measurements. So a lot of questioning and trying to understand reality was happening during the first millennia BCE, leading philosophers to discover that there is a much larger universe outside of the Earth than was previously thought. I applaud the philosophers of the first millennia BCE. They were some of the first true documented scientists, and as we now know, it would still be thousands of years later until we would develop scientific knowledge, techniques and tools to eventually figure out what causes different natural events to actually occur. Christianity started centuries later in the 1st century CE, and over the next 2,000 years it's grown to have the largest following, with nearly 29% of the entire world being Christian today. With people believing in supernatural gods and spirits between different religious beliefs for thousands of years, the majority of people probably just genuinely believed these things to be real over time, as there would be no tools or techniques to prove anything wrong or truly questionable until science started really developing over the last few centuries to empirically measure and record things accurately. And this last century in particular, we've invented and figured out so many ways of measuring reality in ways we've never had access to in the hundreds of thousands of years our species has been surviving on this planet, especially with the invention of the microchip, that with continually greater understanding of the universe and the planet we live on, to me it's no wonder that 100 years ago over 90% of the world was religious, but today that's dropped to around 60 to 65% in some key countries, showing the gradual shift from faith and belief to actual knowledge and understanding that science enables. I've believed for a long time now that the universe somehow is a natural occurrence. I can't explain how, but I'm not going to jump to a conclusion without enough supporting evidence. That's just guessing. The human imagination is a powerful thing and is extremely susceptible to stories and suggestions without knowledge to prove otherwise. And that's why I believe that through developing a continually greater understanding of the universe we live in by continuing to advance science and develop new technologies, we will eventually learn to understand why reality and life came into existence. Probably not in my lifetime, but that's the scientific journey. I'm content with not currently knowing, but wondering if we'll ever figure out some of these seemingly impossible questions. But trying to attribute the creation of our reality to an almighty magical being or intelligence we have no tangible evidence for is just pushing the goalposts of actually figuring out how and why the universe started and exists at all, and is about as useful as an astronomer looking for habitable worlds before lenses were even invented. We just currently don't have the tools or knowledge yet to prove how the reality we know came into existence truly works, and if we don't make ourselves extinct, then maybe we will actually learn and truly understand one day. So perhaps religion began as an attempt to explain the unknown, but as far as we currently know, no other species has had the ability to shape the world like human beings can. But we anthropomorphize everything: our pets, our cars. We love giving things human features even when they're not human or even living. So it's no wonder we imagine these gods to look like humans. But so far we ourselves are the only creators that we have any real proof of. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Well, thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe, like and share. Please also consider joining my Patreon for ad-free uncut videos, or become a channel member here on YouTube. Have an amazing day and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care of yourselves out there.